All right. Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Simbarashe Mhaka. You can call me Simba. I'm an economist at TIPS, working on the Just SA project, and I will be your friendly moderator of the last session. We are looking forward to make it short, sweet, fun, engaging, but more importantly, informative. It is our last session for the day, and indeed, it's been a long day today. So I would like to first start by welcoming you all, and congrats, you've made it to the last session of the day. So this session specifically, we are carrying on with the conversation on unlocking non-trade barriers for regional integration in Africa. In this session, we will explore how infrastructure gaps, policy bottlenecks, and institutional challenges impact trade, regional integration, as well as industrial development. As economist always claims that there is a positive relationship between infrastructure development and growth, we want to expand this discussion further and look at the impact of infrastructure investment in Africa to trade, regional integration, industrial development, and therefore economic growth. And I'm hoping the speaker also touches on unemployment, poverty, and inequality reduction with their presentations. This session is very important as it links to several sustainable development goals. We are speaking directly to Sustainable Development Goal number 9, Industry, Innovation, and Infrastructure, linking it to Sustainable Development Goal number 8 of decent work and economic growth, as well as poverty. And indeed, if infrastructure is made readily accessible by everyone, we can also speak of reducing inequalities, that is Sustainable Development Goal number 10. So indeed, it is a very important discussion ahead. So without further ado, let me introduce our presenters. We are joined by two distinguished speakers. We have Dr. Moses Odumu, who will be joining us online. He is a data research analyst working at Africa International Trade and Commerce Research. We are also joined in person by Dr. Kiru Sichoongwe, who is a senior postdoctoral research fellow at the Sachi ID. So let me first, without wasting much of our time, let me first welcome, but just a reminder to our speakers, you have 10 minutes to present. So we are giving our speakers an opportunity to present first, and thereafter we will open up the floor for discussion. Don't worry, I will be your timekeeper today. So without further ado, let me welcome our first speaker, Dr. Kiru Sichoongwe, who will share his findings on his paper on the relationship between Zambia's infrastructure development and its economic transformation. His research paper is titled Infrastructure Development and Economic Growth in Zambia, Gaps, Barriers, and Strategic Opportunities for Sustainable Development. Doc, you have 15 minutes to present your findings on this paper. The stage is all yours.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, indeed, for the wonderful introduction. I deeply appreciate. And my topic of discussion is on infrastructure development and economic growth in Zambia, gaps, barriers, and strategic opportunities for sustainable development. My presentation outline will begin with an introduction all the way up to the policy implications. Infrastructure remains vital for the social and economic development of any nation. And of course, it affects the economy directly through stimulating output and also indirectly by boosting economic activity as well as raising capital. And by the way, it also leads to high employment. In the case of Zambia, for too long, the country has depended on the mining industry in order to sustain its economic growth since the time it got its independence in the 1964s. And of course, from the year 2000 to 2010, the average growth rate of the country annually has been at 6.8%. And then between 2011 to 2019, there was a steady decline in economic growth, whereby annually the country recorded about 3.1% of economic growth. And then with the coming in of the COVID-19 pandemic, in 2020, for the first time in history, the country recorded negative 3% of annual growth rate. From 2021 to 2024, the country was able to rebound again economically, and growth at least was recorded at over 4.2%. And this year, the growth of the country is projected to be at or to be 6.5% according to the World Bank as well as the IMF projections. Notwithstanding the challenges that the country has experienced in the past and also the positive moves that the country has registered, infrastructure service delivery remains a major barrier to growth, diversification, productivity, as well as industrialization. So this study basically focused on two objectives. The first one was just to examine the relationship between infrastructure development and economic growth in the Zambian context from the year 2000 to the year 2020. The second one was just to identify existing infrastructure gaps, the barriers hindering development, as well as strategic opportunities for sustainable infrastructure development. The data sources for this particular study, it came from the World Bank. And as I said, the time period was chosen based on the availability of the relevant research data. Now, in terms of the variables of interest that were used by this particular study, like I said, this is a study on infrastructure as well as economic growth. So in terms of the infrastructure variables, I was very much interested in energy infrastructure as well as communication infrastructure, just these two. I didn't look at transport infrastructure or other forms of infrastructure. So in terms of economic growth, it was the dependent variable. And of course, it's just the GDP growth rate of a country annually, and of course at constant prices. And then the independent variables, the infrastructure variables, we had energy generation capacity, which is the maximum amount of electricity that is produced. This was the energy infrastructure variable. And then in terms of the communication infrastructure variable, there was internet, which is just a fixed line broadband subscription that produces high-speed internet. In addition to that, we also have mobile cellular, which is just mobile cellular subscriptions. And then the last infrastructure variable under communication, it was telephone, which is fixed line telephony subscription. So in terms of the econometric model that I used, because this is a policy session, I won't spend time on the econometric models. I'll just quickly proceed to the results. But the model that I used was the autoregressive distributed lag bounds model, ARDL model. And with it, it was easy to capture the short run as well as the long run dynamics of the parameters of the variables. So in terms of the results, the long run estimation electricity generation capacity played a significant role in terms of determining economic growth in the context of Zambia by a factor of at least 0.54%. Once again, implying that electricity remains vital to saving most of the industrial needs of the economy of the country. And then in terms of the short-run dynamics, in the short-run dynamics also, electricity generation significantly had a positive relationship with economic growth and with a factor of about 0.69%, implying that, of course, electricity remains crucial, especially in the short run, to be able to stimulate economic activities and also acting as a catalyst for most of these economic activities in the economy. And then the other variable also that was significant in the short run, mobile cellular was also very significant. And it too contributed to boosting economic growth by a factor of 2.87%. Of course, the mechanism under which this works is through reduced transaction costs as well as better communications. And then in terms of the gaps, barriers, and strategic opportunities in terms of infrastructure development for sustainable development for the country, let me start with the electricity capacity. Currently, the country, of course, has got about 3,871 megawatts of installed capacity. And over 6,000 megawatts is still underdeveloped in terms of hydro power potential, because the country generates most of its power from hydro power. And as a result of this particular gap, sometimes meeting the needs of the industry, as well as the mining sector, which is the backbone of the economy, it becomes a challenge. And then in terms of the internet, the gaps there are mostly in terms of digital infrastructure. And one of the presenters actually today highlighted this critical role of digital infrastructure across most parts of Africa. Zambia also is not spared from this particular aspect. Not only that, but also limited and costly bandwidth, which quite often, of course, results in poor service quality. And then in terms of the gaps, when it comes to mobile cellular, infrastructure limitations, especially in the countryside, remains a challenge still. The lack of cellular base stations, and also in most cases, lack of access roads due to the nature of the terrain in most of the rural areas or countryside. In terms of the telephone services, because mobile cellular as well as telephone services, they are more or less like similar, albeit distinct. Supporting infrastructure is still a challenge. Yeah, especially in the countryside, because the deployment of telecommunication services is problematic. But not only that also, but also the shift that is currently taking place in terms of consumers preferring to use mobile communication as compared to the actual telephone services, and thereby reducing investment in telephone landlines. And then in terms of the barriers to infrastructure development, one of them, of course, is the financial constraints, which makes it very challenging in terms of sourcing long-term financing. And thereby this hinders infrastructure development, especially large-scale projects. The other barriers relates to institutional as well as governance challenges. Bureaucracy is still an issue, as well as weak institutional capacity and planning, which may not be adequate. And with all these factors combined, it significantly contributes to impeding project approvals, implementation, as well as maintenance of infrastructure projects. The other component is that of technical and human capacity limitations. The shortage of skilled professionals is still a necessary challenge in the country. And as a result, lack of qualified workforce quite often leads to delays in project execution. And this affects operational efficiency to a large extent. And then we also have the aspect of policy and regulatory challenges. Because the framework that is governing the regulations and institutions in my country is still evolving. And this results, of course, in limited guidance and support for infrastructure projects. So in terms of the strategic opportunities, so in spite of the challenges, the gaps and the barriers that I've highlighted, there's still some strategic opportunities at the end of the day, such as public-private partnership, which can be able to bridge the financing gap and be able to accelerate infrastructure development. There's also potential in green and renewable energy investment by diversifying the energy mix and be able to reduce dependence on hydroelectric power, especially in the era of climate change. There's also the aspect of digital infrastructure expansion as another strategic opportunity, which can be able also to serve other sectors, including health, education, as well as commerce, and overall drive economic development. And then also the aspect of harnessing the bond markets, that is both sovereign as well as corporate bond markets, in order to be able to mobilize the much needed resources that are needed to bridge the infrastructure gap. So in conclusion, and also in terms of the policy implications, based on the findings of the study, there's need actually to expand electricity generation via public-private partnership in order to be able to boost efficiency and also optimize the energy sector, the energy infrastructure of the country. There's also need to prioritize and be able to harness green and renewable energy in order to be able to ensure a reliable power supply, especially in the wake of climate change, given the fact that renewable energy also is capable of driving industrialization. The need also to be able to expand communication and mobile infrastructure, which is vital for economic growth, looking at the opportunity that it can offer in terms of accessing new markets as well as participating in e-commerce. Otherwise, thank you very much, and this marks the end of my presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Kiru, for those deep insights on the nexus between infrastructure development and economic transformation in Zambia. Your presentation highlights that infrastructure development, particularly energy, electricity generation, as well as internet access, indeed can be used to stimulate Zambia's economic growth as well as industrial development. Our next speaker is Dr. Moses Odumu, who is joining us online today. His research paper explores the relationship between infrastructure development and economic growth and trade in the context of Southern African region. From his paper, his strong focus is on unlocking infrastructure bottlenecks and industrial opportunities in the Southern African region. His research paper is titled Impact of Infrastructure Development on Trade Barriers and Industrial Growth in Southern Africa.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you, the audience. I'm presenting on the impact of infrastructure development on trade barriers and industrial growth in Southern Africa. And my name is Dr. Moses Odumu. So the challenges of infrastructural deficit and digital divide in the Southern Africa, as well as in the whole of Africa and the third world country is apparent everywhere. And this persistent barrier pose key challenges to the Southern African economy, and they also inhibit competitiveness in Africa. And with this view that policymakers as well as stakeholders are optimistic that AfCFTA should be able to provide a framework for deeper regional integration and industrialization in the sub-region. This study sets out to examine how the infrastructural development can reduce these trade barriers that have been identified, and as well as provide empirical evidence to inform regional infrastructure and industrial policy. Basically, the objective is to, and we look at the trade barrier aspect of it, as well as how this can influence industrial growth in terms of economic transformation. We reviewed the related theories, which all agree that infrastructure enhances trade and growth by lowering costs and spreading industrial activities across Southern Africa. Some of the theories reviewed are growth pool theories, infrastructure-led growth hypothesis, and institutional economic perspective. They all support this view. And we use the panel autoregressive distributed lag, the PMG aspect of them. We're able to review 12 Southern African countries for which we have data, and the time was from 2001 to 2023. Data was basically sourced from the World Bank, World Development Indicator, and trade opponents were used as proxy for trade barrier and industrial growth and independent variables, which cut across the infrastructures from transport, energy, digital infrastructures, and we control for this variable with GDP and foreign direct investment. And after performing a pre-test in station to ensure the data is viable and could be used to perform the analysis, we conducted the RDL model, and then we also estimated the error correction model and performed some diagnostic tests to ensure that the model, the result of the model is reliable and can inform policy. And the results are quite commendable. The results show what the optimism, they reflect the optimism of the stakeholders in the AfCFTA, and it shows some significant variables as well as some non-significant variables. We also have a country-specific result because we use the RDL model, which we're able to now, since in the error correction term is significant, we interpreted the result for the long run, which is for the Southern African as a whole. These economies are also heterogeneous, so we interpreted the country-specific results. Those results are quite large, so we won't be able to present all of them, but we just sample a few that are most important in this regard. So as you can see, for the trade barrier, which was proxied by trade opponents, we see that transport infrastructure is significant. Of course, it's less than 0.01, and the threshold is 0.05. And then we're able to interpret this long-run result because the error correction time is also significant and it's negative, showing that it's not explosive. In case of disequilibrium, the economy of Southern Africa will also be able to revert back to equilibrium within a short time. For the trade barrier model, in less than 3 years, the economy should be back to equilibrium in case of disequilibrium. While in the case of the industrial growth model, in less than 2 years, in short, in just a little over a year. So transport infrastructure shows it has positive impact on trade openness, and the energy infrastructure as well has positive impact on trade openness in Southern Africa. We're looking at the homogeneous aspect, looking at Southern Africa as a whole now. Digital infrastructure, however, has negative impact on trade openness, and foreign direct investment has a negative impact on trade openness within the period studied. But for the country-specific results, it shows that the digital and energy infrastructure will significantly boost trade and industry, first in Southern Africa and Angola. And then GDP is also the main growth driver in Botswana, country-specific results now, and Namibia, as well as Zimbabwe. And then energy infrastructure is shown to hinder growth in Mozambique and Madagascar. The reason for this are not far-fetched, in that little infrastructure is not able to do anything at all. It's better if you are not ready than to just go and put in resources that will, at the end of the day, not have been able to impact the livelihood of the people. So it will serve as a sunk cost, and at the end, it's almost like a waste. And most of the Southern African governments are fond of doing that. So this study is like a wake-up call. So a wake-up call to Southern Africa as well as the whole of Africa, that what is worth doing well, what is worth doing at all is worth doing well. So if we are ready in terms of infrastructure, we should all go all out for it. Because if we just put in some money there, the money will not, the resources will be wasted, which could have been used for other things, because these things has opportunity cost. They have other uses that could have been put, they could be put into. So we, based on the findings of these studies and this backdrop, we're recommending to the SADC, NEPAD, and the national ministries of the Southern African countries, as well as AfDB, and then supporting agencies like the World Bank, to focus on modernizing transport infrastructure and expanding it across the region. Also, energy infrastructure, it should be among the top priority of the countries of the Southern Africa, which will enable energy to be made available at available cost, at affordable cost rather, which will aid industries and enhance regional integration. Also, partners like the FDP and the World Bank, they should also establish a mechanism to mobilize capital for cross-border infrastructure projects. And the national ministries of the Southern Africa should also aim to improve digital connectivity and e-commerce through broadband expansion. And then through policy regularization, NEPAD and SADC should be able to form a coherent strategy that will link infrastructure with enterprises as innovation across the sub-region. For the country-specific recommendation, we're recommending that Angola's energy investment should be enhanced And South Africa has showed positive progress, lots of progress in terms of digital infrastructure. And so that should be a pathway that South Africa can take to drive growth effectively in the country. For Mozambique, energy efficiency issues is still a great issue, like we saw from the result that it has negative impact. So it's inefficient, meaning that the volume of, because energy is what really, it requires a large sum of resources to be committed to it. So there's a lot that needs to be done in that aspect for Mozambique in terms of energy generation. And Lesotho's infrastructure also lack impact, which requires policy overhaul. So these a few recommendations we've been able to pick from the main study. The main study contains the whole country-specific recommendations as well as the recommendation for Southern Africa as a whole. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moses. Those were fascinating results. You have indeed shown a strong intersection between infrastructure development and industrial development in the Southern African region. Thank you so much for that. I think we are moving on to the interesting section where we call upon your reflections, questions, and any reactions from these amazing presentations from our presenters. I think I see a hand there. We can take 2 in the first round, 3 in the first round. Then we let our presenters respond. I think we are doing well on time, so we can have a second round as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my question is to Dr. Kiru. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. Just to touch on the electricity component, which you mentioned as a challenge, you highlighted that 6,000 megawatts of hydropower electricity in Zambia is underdeveloped. So with that, I would like to ask, is reliance on one type of electricity component not another challenge in the future? Because as you look at it in this perspective now, I know that hydropower obviously deepens every time there's droughts. So is promoting further development for hydropower a good way to go about providing stability in terms of electricity for industries? And then just the second question is on the mining and industry. You mentioned that they do rely a lot on electricity, obviously, to do their production. I just want to find out from the work that you've done, are they not looking at doing the provisions themselves? So are these companies not investing in other electricity sources away from the national grid? Thank you.
My question is in relation to internet access. My name is Isa. Specifically in the northwestern region of Zambia and the Copper Belt, what type of infrastructure are you guys willing to look into to have access for kids in schools? Thank you.
Do we have any questions from the room?
My question is to Dr. Kiru. I want to commend him for a job well done. However, I think the ECM result, the error correction term model, in the short run is actually wrong. What do I mean? It should be between -1 to 0. But in his result, I'm seeing -1.480. So I'll suggest that he increase the time span of the data in order to correct the short run result. Otherwise, as it is, it is still faulty. Then the second one is on the recommendation he projected. the recommendations are more general than specific. I was more interested in his paper and the infrastructure. So I was expecting recommendations that are more specific to the sector he looked at in Zambia. The situation, what the fact says in Zambia should have been the recommendation rather than the general one. Thank you, that's all.
Okay, let me take one last question from the room.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Kiru and Dr. Moses, for the insightful presentations. My addition is just a comment in the space of hydroelectric, in the area of electricity generation. Given that Africa is abundant in terms of sun, what strategies, or have there been any studies that have been done regards the issue of using solar powered electricity for our industry? I think if we can have a study that focuses on that, somehow it can actually add value to what we are doing. Because as you know, hydroelectricity, we do face challenges because of water challenges. And the moment we try to harness solar energy, I think it also will cut down in terms of the cost of production for the industry. So if we can have something on solar powered electricity, I think would do justice in terms of production in Africa. That's my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's hold it there for, I think I have two online questions. I think the first one is for Dr. Kiru, and this one aligns well with the quote saying, internet is no longer a luxury, but an essential utility for our daily lives. So the question is, in your results, you have shown, I think you have shown a positive and significant impact on internet access to economic growth of Zambia, but the results were different in the long run. I think the results were insignificant. So the question is, what explains that, and what factors are you using to explain that scenario? Okay, so can start with you, Dr. Kiru.
Yeah, thank you so much indeed for those insightful questions. I'll try to handle all of them. Let me start with the first one that was asked by one lady. Unfortunately, they didn't identify themselves before Issa. In terms of electricity capacity, which is underdeveloped of 6,000 megawatts. Yeah, for too long, the country has relied on hydroelectric hydroelectricity, which is just generated from water, because we've got a lot of water bodies. But in spite of the same, I agree with you that reliance on hydroelectric power is not a good option, because recently, of course, the country has been marred by electricity challenges as a result of the droughts that the country has been receiving of late. And so this has affected also the generation of electricity, and also the supply of constant and reliable supply to the mining industry as well as to households. And this has affected a lot of economic activities really at the household level and also at the industrial level. So there's need, of course, to be able to, like I said in my strategic opportunities, to be able to look at the other sources of energy, as in having an energy mix that will be able to assist. And it's not only Zambia that is affected, because the place where hydroelectricity generation is produced from in Zambia, which is the Kariba, we also share it with another country called Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe equally has been affected in terms of electricity generation capacity. Constant power blackouts, I don't know for how long, maybe 2 hours or more than that. Yeah. And also to some extent, Malawi also has been affected, and many other countries within Africa. And then in terms of the mining industry, that quite a lot depend on the electricity that is generated from hydro. They haven't yet looked at ways in which they can also generate their own electricity, away from the main grid, because the main grid is managed by the Zambia Electricity Supply Corporation, which is more or less like a quasi, the private and the public sector at the same time. So it's a quasi. So hopefully they'll be able to look at alternatives in light of the pressing challenges of climate change that Zambia continues to face together with other countries in the region. And then there's also a question from Issa. He talked about two regions, Northwestern Province as well as the Copper Belt, and in terms of the internet access there with regard to the kids in the schools. Well, if you look at Copper Belt, indeed, that's where most of the mining activities actually happens. And so you find that in urban areas, internet access is not a challenge. And same applies with Northwestern Province to some certain extent, because there are some mining activities that are happening there. And because of the nature of those particular industries or activities, that is the mining industry. So you find that internet access in the urban areas is not much of a challenge, but in the rural areas, it's still a challenge to some certain extent. So whilst the kids in urban areas can be able to access internet, but their counterparts in the rural areas, they may not be able to have that opportunity or luxury, because one, internet access also is poor due to the infrastructure limitation that I talked about. Not only that, but also electricity in most of these or those rural areas is still a challenge. So coupled with these two components, it becomes difficult really for reliable internet to be accessed indeed. Hopefully going forward, mechanisms will be able to be put in place so that no child, regardless of their circumstances or where they dwell, should be able to be left behind. And then let me go to Board here, who talked about the error correction model being a BT40. Maybe that could have been an oversight, but nonetheless, that has been taken into consideration. I'll try to go back and have a look at it again critically, and then also compare with what other studies have said. And then, of course, God recommended to say there's need for me to be able to increase the time frame of the study so as to be able to cure some of supposedly errors that she has noticed. The challenge with that is that if you look at my study period for this particular study, I said it was from the year 2000 to the year 2020. Now, in the case of Zambia and in the case of many African countries, by the year 2000 or 1999 or 1998, they didn't have internet access and they didn't have mobile subscription. They still had those digital analog telephone landlines. So that can be challenging given this particular scenario. Because the latest information and data that we find, especially on variables like internet as well as mobile cellular, is just from the year 2000. Economic growth is there up to as far back as the 1964, but data for the other two variables is missing. So that can be challenging indeed. But nevertheless, thank you so much for that recommendation. And then there was also a comment. Unfortunately, people didn't recognize themselves or introduce themselves, so I can't relate the name, but I think it talked about the aspect of solar. The possibilities of solar being able to be used as another conduit for the production of electricity. That's a possibility, of course, because if you look at Zambia as well as most African countries in the region, on average, in a year, they receive about 300 days of sunshine. 300 days of sunshine. And you are told that you have got 365 days in a year. So 65 days in a year, they don't have sunshine. So there is a huge potential indeed when it comes to solar. But I haven't yet come across a study that has come out categorically strong to state that solar can also be used to drive or to propel industrialization in any country. But of course, there are a lot of studies that have been done that solar is a viable option to be able to light up household needs. Yeah, I'll still continue doing some research on that, and I think we can still continue keeping in touch. And should I be able to come across anything or something, definitely I'll be able to share it with you. And then the last one, that was an online question, I guess, where they talked about internet access, of course, having a significant impact in the short run as compared to not in the long run. Well, the nature of economic studies, in most cases, you find that's the way they behave indeed. Yeah, in the long run, of course, it is true that for my study, there wasn't a positive relationship between internet access as well as economic growth. But of course, in the short run, there was that relationship. Yeah, basically, I can explain it this way because it all goes back, like in the short run also, that's the run in which, that's a period maybe from 3 to 5 years or so. You expect a lot of economic activities. Yeah, a lot of economic e-commerce. Yeah, within the country and also outside the country. And of course, those also, they help to facilitate economic growth in the short run. And then eventually in the long run, you don't expect such kind of status quo as you found it like in the short run or so. Otherwise, thank you very much, unless there's a question that I haven't addressed thoroughly.
Thank you so much for those deep insights, Dr. Kiru. Dr. Moses online, I know there was no questions from the room, but we definitely can't let you go. We have one question from our online audience saying at 2.7 gigawatt generation in Mozambique, is that really an issue? I think to add on that question, question from my side, you have shown strong intersection between infrastructure and industrial development in the Southern African region. Coming back to one of our themes of regional integration, what, in your own opinion, do you see as the most binding infrastructure constraint to regional integration in the Southern African region? Dr. Moses, do you want to respond?
Thank you very much. If I will speak based on the study we've conducted, we've seen that the most infrastructural barrier in the Southern Africa is energy, based on the topic, and transport infrastructure. I think that is also very, very important, especially the transport infrastructure, because there will be a need for the region to be opened up, like the AfCFTA is currently moving. So there will be a need to open up the economy of Southern Africa through not just energy infrastructure, but also transport infrastructure, which will serve as connectivity. And I think this will also aid in terms of job creation. Because that is going into the risk sector. And whatever we do, that's especially in terms of internet, we'll be limiting quite a number of job creation. Yes, job will be created, but it's going to be for the very skilled or and intellectual about, and the people who are not so educated, who are also very, very important to the ecosystem in the Southern Africa. So in terms of transport network, which brings in the development partners like the SADC network, working together with AFDB, bank, with all the funds coming in, opening up the sub-regions in terms of the road infrastructure, good road network, which have multiplying effect in terms of not just even job creation, investors will come in and a whole lot of things, terminals will be created, and easy movement of goods and services. The airline, you can't move everything through the air to the final destination as far as Africa is concerned. Let's think Africa. And even in other advanced countries where there are other space buses that can move short things, but the road is still quite much efficient. And then in terms of the ripple effect, the multiplying effect that you have on the economy, on the national economy, as well as the regional economy, is very, very viable. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Moses, for that response. For procedural justice sake, do we have anyone with a burning question? One opportunity for one person with a burning question. Yes, Dr. Niva.
Hi, I'm Niva Machetla from TIPS. You know, just to comment on the solar thing. In South Africa, we have a lot of mining companies in particular that say they are developing off-grid solar, mostly because Eskom became so unreliable. But the fact is, obviously by itself, it doesn't work, but as a system that can in the long term reduce costs and that also provides a backup when there's a shortage on the grid, they seem to think it will work. And I mean, you're looking at quite large systems in some cases. So I think there are quite a lot of studies of that if you're interested. So it might be worth looking at. I mean, the one thing I would say is, as you know, the upfront costs are very high. So I don't think they would have done it if Eskom hadn't been load shedding last year. Sorry, 2023.
Thank you, Doc, for your comment. I think we still have about 4 minutes. I want to give our presenters a chance to share their last remarks as we close. But before that, I think it won't be fair, Dr. Kiru, if I end without asking you this. You have shown that infrastructure, particularly electricity infrastructure and internet infrastructure, is a strong positive and significant relationship in the short run. And as the online person asked, the results changed in the long run, but what I liked is electricity infrastructure still maintained a positive impact on economic growth in Zambia. While you're wrapping up, my question is, what specific policy and institutional reforms does Zambia needs urgently to unlock their electricity potential for industrial use?
Yeah, thank you so much. In terms of policy, really, I mean, there's need to look at other alternatives. Yeah, because for too long, of course, we have depended on hydro. Yeah, there's need to look for other alternatives. Yeah, which are clean in this particular case. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend the nuclear because I don't think the country will have uranium there. So it can be kind of costly again to go through such kind of a venture. But I think we can take advantage of maybe wind energy as well as solar energy and then see how far it can take us. And then in terms of institutional reforms, yeah, there's need, of course, to be able to reform most of these institutions that run or are mandated to be able to run the energy sector. Yeah, because if the industrial sector cannot be able to receive constant and reliable supply of energy for over 4 hours, and the same applies with the households, this is really a wake-up call to say there's need for some reforms in the institutions. Yeah, I think we need I don't want to sound like a politician. Anyway, what we need is just institutions that are viable and effective, and also the governance part of it. I think that becomes important. Yeah, viable as well as capable, and also the governance aspect. We have to look into all those particular components, because at the end of the day, it all borders on governance. Once there's good governance in place, not at a country level, but within the institution itself, I think you don't expect some of these particular challenges. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc. Any last remarks from our speakers? We can begin with Dr. Moses online.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Moderator. I will proceed that with the targeted policy recommendations that we've mentioned so far, which includes issues on the coordinated regional investment in the transport, in energy, like the other speaker has said, in terms of digital infrastructure and the establishment of a dedicated financing mechanism from partners, which we mentioned, World Bank, EFDB, even SADC, regional body, coordinating this thing together to bridge persistent infrastructural gap. Africa knows what to do, but this gap are enormous and needs collaborative effort. With this, Southern Africa's trade and industrial potential will be maximized if all hands are on deck, thereby supporting sustainable and inclusive economic growth under the AfCFTA framework. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, ever since the forum started, is the issues of industrialization. Yeah, for us to industrialize, of course, we need constant supply of energy across all African countries. Yeah, you cannot industrialize without energy. Energy is still vital for industrial activities. Yeah, so because of energy infrastructure, and once we industrialize, then we'll be able to talk about reducing the levels of inequality, the levels of unemployment that you talked about earlier on. Of course, our presentation never touched on that one, but also reducing the poverty levels that we continue to see across most of African countries. I strongly believe that it is still possible, and I think let these discussions not just die in this particular room. Let them be able to reach also the policymakers. And from time to time, of course, I strongly believe that there's need for constant collaboration and of sharing information between academicians as well as the policymakers, because this is a continent, of course, that we love dearly, and we cannot let it fail on our watch. Yeah, thank you so much.
A round of applause to our wonderful speakers for their contributions today. I would like to end this session by thanking all our speakers for these rich insights, as well as our audience for this thoughtful engagement. Indeed, in this session, we have seen that addressing infrastructure is no longer a national issue only. It is indeed also a regional issue with long-term direct implications on trade, regional integration, industrial development. So let's carry forward these reflections to the broad conversation at this TIPS forum, as well as beyond the TIPS forum, and apply the learnings in our daily roles, in our jobs. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.